Hey guys, this is Ashley Leftwich, and this is my backwards design in Bloom's Taxonomy presentation for Module 2. And we're going to dive right in with the backwards design model. And the backwards design model was developed in considerable detail by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee in their book Understanding Bad Design, hence the name. And a lot of the examples in the book really lend itself to K-12 education, which is right up my alley. And there are 3 steps or phases to this understanding by design model. And the interesting thing, though, is to look at where are we starting at? How did the creators give educators this process and why? So we're going to dive right into identifying desired results. So this is very much a beginning with the end in mind mindset. And Wiggins and McTee had these 3 questions for this phase that they wanted teachers to think about, or educators really to think about. And one was, what should participants hear, read, view, explore, or otherwise encounter? What are you going to expose the learners to? What is that end result? What experiences should they come out of at the end of this? And then it says, what knowledge and skills should participants master? And a lot of times we think of like at the end of a unit. So for example, right now I'm in 5th grade math, we're doing multiplying and dividing with decimals. So my end result that I have for these kids is they're able to proficiently and fluently multiply and divide decimals in the standard algorithm, not just conceptually with models. And then the last question is, what are big ideas and important understandings participants should retain? So one of the main things we want them to retain is using that standard algorithm with fluency, no matter what the numbers are and what they change to in my case. So now we're going to take this phase of the next, determine assessment evidence. And in this stage, we are going to consider all of those questions in the first one of identify desired results to how is that going to look whenever we're assessing students. And these are the following questions that the creators have for consideration. How will I know if students have achieved the desired results? What will I accept as evidence of student understanding and proficiency? This is where it really comes into play of having something like an exemplar or success criteria that you can sit there and look at and evaluate. Are my students being successful in this? Are they engaging in these higher order thinking atmospheres, or are they just coasting by? And one of the examples that was given in the video was of a prep school with high performing students. The creator or presenter of the video, he was talking about a school that had asked for his expertise, and this prep school was one that was very high performing, very elite, but what they didn't realize was they were just taking smart kids, and at the end they still were smart kids, but they weren't performing any higher than when they came in. And it was like this school was giving themselves a pat on the back of, oh, well, these smart kids are still smart. And that's not really creating high order thinking lessons or allowing students to be creative in their thinking. It was just delivering information to students who were already able to take that information in. It was not stimulating neural pathways appropriately, and that's something you really need to think about when you're determining assessment evidence. Are you allowing for them to think higher order in the material and lessons that you're presenting to these students, and are they able to show you that in this assessment? So then we're going to go to step 3, or phase 3, plan learning and experiences and instruction. This is really the final part that's piecing it all together to determine how to teach based on criteria established prior to this step. So this is really where you're getting down to the nitty-gritty, but you have to have the desired results and the assessment evidence piece to really be able to plan this instruction. And here are some of the questions that should be considered. What enabling knowledge, facts, concepts, principles, and skills will students need in order to perform effective and achieve desired results? What activities will equip students with needed knowledge and skills? What will need to be taught and coached? How should be best taught? And in light of these performance goals, and what materials and resources are best suited to accomplish these goals? I think this goes hand in hand with something I'm personally experiencing right now in education. So one of the things we're noticing in math is that we're being really heavy in the procedural side of math, such as standard algorithm, but we're not being so heavy in the conceptual piece, the why. Why do we multiply this way? Why is it when we multiply a decimal by a decimal, the product is actually smaller? And things like that. That's just one example. But what we're noticing is a lot of the times when we're identifying desired results, yes, we see the standard algorithm as the desired result, but are the students getting there if we're not building upon that conceptual piece to let the students understand the why? And so that's really been a huge part of my personal experience. But then also, we did a lot of this as well in math with building in the summer our curriculum. And one of the things we did here is we looked at the STAR test, in Texas at least, and we looked at, okay, what is the criteria here? What do we want our students to be able to do? What is the STAR test expecting them to be able to do? And then on top of that, how is the STAR test going to ask these questions? We now have this STAR 2.0, so we have different interactive type questions that the students are going to be exposed to this year for the first time. And that was a big thing to look at is, are my students going to be able to manipulate a number line? Are my students going to be able to build an expression and type it in themselves? Things like that are just like small examples that they'll need, but it is something we really have to think about to make sure they're successful in their learning. So now we're going to take a switch to Bloom's taxonomy, which I think goes extremely well with the backwards lesson design because it is a way of building, questioning, exposing students to information, but in a way that stimulates that higher order thinking. And Bloom's taxonomy, of course, was created by Benjamin Bloom. It's been revised. Sometimes you'll see different versions of this Bloom's taxonomy. This is one that Vanderbilt University has on their in their research that they reference pretty frequently. So we're going to take a look at that today. And we're going to start at the bottom. So the bottom two, remember and understand, are your basic level. You're recalling, you're explaining things, but it doesn't necessarily take that higher order level of application whenever you are teaching or putting this out there for the students. So even though there's a time and a place for these lower level questions and things like that, it's not always needed, and that's what's the hard part, is getting out of that who, what, when, where, why, and having students go up to the higher order, the higher levels of things like apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So we're going to move on to the next two, which are, or what the next one really, apply, use information in new situations. So for example, a lot of the times we'll see students who are able to do the standard algorithm when given the two numbers of multiplying decimals, but then when you take it to a word problem, which is a real world situation where they have to multiply change in money, they'll often freak out. They're not used to this apply application. How are we implementing this? How are we solving this? And those verbs that we see on the side there underneath are really what we need to use in our objectives, being able to state what those learning outcomes are going to look like. And then we go up to the analyze, drawing connections among ideas. I really used this one a lot when I was doing more RLA, and I feel like this is where I fall short in this analyze area with math. It was very easy to use, analyze, and draw connections among different ideas, especially when you're doing text-to-self connections or text-to-text connections, text-to-world connections, analyzing how they're different and alike, or just how they are organized or distinguished, really is a key concept for students. And this makes them, one, have personal connections, because a lot of times we don't realize what connections we're sitting there making for the students. And then we're going to go to the evaluate. And my goodness, I feel like this is another one that, man, I work so hard, but I skip this one pretty often. and not intentionally, but I want to jump right to the create, the produce new and additional original work. But so then I lose that sense of evaluate of why is this phase important. And this one is important because it's a justification or a standard decision. I did used to use this pretty frequently when I taught first grade, and I would have my first graders justify or even really, it was really more of a debate when we were talking about character traits and how to treat others. And my goodness, you really have to appreciate education whenever you see first graders, 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds, some of them, using this evaluate stage to justify a decision they have or defend a character and their decisions in a story. My goodness, it's amazing to see them take that extra step and apply it to not only what they think, but support with the text or, real world connections. And the last step of Bloom's taxonomy, one of the hardest I feel like to do, but man, the most rewarding when we do it, is create, to produce new or original work. In this case, we're allowing students to design, construct, assemble, or formulate something all original. One of the things that I use this for often was last year when I did 5th grade social studies. I would do this for when we researched the founding fathers. And some of you may be like, all right, well, how are you going to do something new and original with this? So what I would do is instead of just your basic research project, I had them create a trading card for a founding father of their choosing, or it could have been an explorer, depending on the class. And the interesting thing, though, is they had to really investigate, formulate, and develop this idea of, okay, well, what is my trading card going to look like? Is it going to be more like a Pokemon card? Is it going to be more like a baseball card? How is this going to change? Do I create a rating system? Do I give a point system? And what we came up with was, I say we, really, what they came up with was fantastic. And each class's set of trading cards were all unique and different. Their classifications were different. They even pulled, I'd say obscure, I don't feel like that's the right word, but lesser known founding fathers to do this, and which created that sense of investigation, because it wasn't just Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Hancock that you see so many times. It was other ones that were not always given the credit, which led to them making the connection of, like the superheroes, Marvel, the characters that are lesser known but still important. Maybe something like Ant-Man, who, even though he's not like a tried and true original Avenger, he's still an important piece. And saying all this to say that these students went in and created this whole system, how they're going to rate the founding fathers and give them points and be able to use these cards in real world application. And it was fantastic. So with all of this, though, I show you this to let you know that these are things that we in education really use day in, day out, all the time. The backwards lesson design and Bloom's taxonomy are not just something that we sit through a training and we say, okay, well, we need you to apply this in your classroom, and then you stick that book on your shelf and don't use it for 7 years. This is one that you have to, with fidelity, use to get the learning results that we're expecting, to move students, and to create lifelong learners. And I feel like we lose that sense sometimes with the pressures that we have with SPED and 504 dyslexia and standardized testing, but they have so much value. Here's just a bit of my works cited that I use, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.